Krishna Krishna So I'd like to welcome you all to tonight's Bhakti Night program. And as you see tonight, for those of you who's here for the first time? First time comers? Okay. So some regular, some first time people. You see tonight's format's a little different. So usually our Bhakti Night format is a more traditional speaker makes a presentation. And but if we look at the text, spiritual text, specifically in our tradition, you'll see that oftentimes these texts are in the form of a dialogue, right? Two people speaking. Usually there's one person who is somehow in a difficult situation, cannot understand what's happening, and then there is a sage who is there to explain to him or help him understand certain things. So because Maharaj was here to embody the sage, and I'm here to embody the person who doesn't really know what's happening, we thought that it would be good to have a little bit of a discussion tonight. And our topic for discussion is the relationship between humanity and spirituality. So humanity is, in the world that we live in, we see that increasingly people are experiencing a life that is more artificial, and also a world that is to a large part getting much harsher. And basically, oftentimes people feel like just to be some of their basic human needs, human relationships, that the world is sometimes making it a little difficult. So it's a very relevant topic, and we decided to talk, and actually I decided that topic. Maharaj was very gracious, and he was willing to speak on whatever we were hoping for. And I always found his presentation of spirituality one that has a human element to it. I think is very refreshing. So I think before we start off, so that's sort of just a general introduction to what we will be looking at tonight and discussing this relationship between humanity and spirituality. And to start off the discussion, I would like to ask you, Maharaj, tell us a little bit about your background, and then specifically, I think opening position, that's something that we can think about, is how renunciation or renounced life, which you have dedicated yourself to, which is an interesting part. No, we don't need the mic.
Just the people in the back.
Okay.
Just gonna be here.
I don't think it's really going to work though. But if it looks good in the video, then we'll put the mic there.
Not on the video, just people in the back. Or you could speak a little louder.
I'll speak a little louder. I think I'll speak a little. Yeah, those mics aren't really going to pick anything up. So, a little bit about your journey, and specifically how you came to this point of making lifelong vows of renunciation, which I think is going to segue us into a discussion on humanity and spirituality.
Thank you so much, Hari Vilas. Thank you everyone for coming this evening. Yeah, looking forward to having a discussion and seeing what comes out of this exchange. My journey, I guess, the ancient scriptures talk about how when we begin our journey of spiritual life, in this life, it's not actually the beginning. There were many lives previous in which we already perhaps had many experiences and, came across many things. And in this life, we're just kind of picking up from where we left off. So I don't know who I was in my previous life. I tried to do a past life regression many times. But somehow or other, I didn't have any visions. But I could see from my childhood that there were definitely things within me which perhaps didn't really go in sync with the world that I was living in. I was living in a world in which everything was about accumulation. I guess I grew up in quite an affluent family, but my tendency was always towards like simplicity and minimalism. I grew up in a family in which everyone was a high achiever, and for me that didn't really move my heart. I grew up in a family where there was a lot of tradition and culture which I respected, but for me didn't really also grab my interest because I was kind of thinking it was a little superficial. And so I found myself in my youth a bit introverted and a little bit different from the world. And then I was thinking, what am I going to do? I have to do something with my life. I have to find something that's going to inspire me. And so I guess at the age of 15, 16, I began looking into different spiritual books, different spiritual traditions. Of course, I came across the Bhagavad Gita at that time. And it kind of fascinated me because it was pretty counterintuitive. For those of you that have read the Bhagavad Gita, you know that it's a conversation between Arjuna and Krishna. And when you begin that conversation reading it and you hear all of Arjuna's arguments, you think like, wow, this guy's the one with the wisdom. And then you later on find out he's the confused guy. And Krishna's the one with the wisdom. And immediately it kind of flipped my understanding, because my traditional idea of what spirituality was challenged by the Bhagavad Gita. Anyway, so then I continued reading that, went to university, and after graduating I decided I still hadn't found what was moving my heart. So I guess at that time I just took some time to disconnect, and I went to India for 6 months at the age of 21. And that was a really transformational time, because I felt like it was the first time in life that I was away from all of the noises, the opinions, the narratives, the pressures, the traditions that I realized at the age of 21 had drowned out what my inner calling was. Therefore, I still to this day recommend everyone do that. Spend some time away from your normal habitat, because you might find it reveals something in your heart that you never otherwise heard. And so, yeah, I lived as a monk there for 6 months, and then found my calling there. And then I came back to London, became a monk, and I guess what to say, just carried on. And still learning, still growing, still discovering. And last year I took vows of lifelong renunciation, which I guess is a landmark in someone's life. But I'll just end on this point of humanity and transcendence. The day I took vows of lifelong renunciation, I thought there may be a magical change when I woke up the next morning. And many people ask me, how was it? And I tell them, on that night, everything changed and nothing changed. Everything changed in the sense it was a new life, a new role, a new social identity in one sense. But nothing changed in the sense that I realized I still have my human weaknesses. I'm still a normal person. I'm still beyond all of those names, just a soul trying to find love, trying to find pure consciousness. And so, yeah, that was a stark realization.
Yeah, I find it interesting how you say that. If we think about when people would say, spirituality with a human face, or oftentimes people complain, like, we are looking for, what is the opposite of someone who is human or humane? Is harshness, or a certain sense of denial, of some of our basic desires, for example. And I find it interesting if we look at vows of renunciation, for example, which is called, in Sanskrit, it's called the Brihat Vrata, which is the great vow. It also can sometimes be called the terrible vow. We see that in literature, sometimes it's described like that. And I find it interesting just in our tradition how, on the one hand, what is more normal, one could say? What is a more humane desire, being human, than the desire to, say, have a family and have, quote unquote, a normal life? And in the name of spirituality or transcendence, one ultimately takes that decision to deny that. How do we understand that? How does these ideals of spirituality seem to contrast so strongly against the basic human needs that we have? And how have you made peace with that in your own life? And how do you see that being relevant then for the rest of the world, you know, in terms of normal, quote unquote, normal humans? And how do they orientate themselves towards the example of renunciation as set, for example, by monks or renunciates?
Yeah. Yeah, it seems the most natural of things to be attracted to the opposite gender, to then form relationships, to have a family, and to exchange love and feelings in that way. And isn't it a little bit inhumane to walk away from that and deny the most innate of human intuition, as it were? I guess the first thing I'd say is this: renunciation, I think, is something that all of us do. Renunciation, or some level of what we call austerity, is the idea whereby you deny an immediate passion that you have in pursuance of something much greater. And so we often tell people, don't give up what you want most for what feels good now. And we all know that that's a good thing. And therefore, I think all of us are renounced in some way, because we learn to give up things that we feel are not beneficial for us at this time in pursuance of something higher. So I think renunciation is not an unknown concept. It's a concept which everyone applies in their life to a greater or lesser extent. Now, when it comes to relationships and the sexual urge, what the ancient scriptures explain is that that attraction between man and woman is actually the principle on which the whole world is going on. In one of our literatures, it says that sex is the backdrop of civilization, because it's like that's basically what everything in the material world ultimately is aiming towards. And so this idea of how to transcend this sexual desire and find the pure form of love is actually the essence of spirituality. In one sentence, we could say spirituality means the process of turning lust into love. And if one is able to do that, then their spirituality is perfected. And to the extent that we struggle with that, we realize we have work to do. So now in that process of transforming lust into love, different people may do it in different ways. Some people will do it by a complete renunciation of any kind of contact and engage their energies elsewhere to then transcend. And that comes naturally to them. And for other people, they'll engage in relationships, but in a very, very specific and spiritual way. And thereby, in our tradition, many people do get married. Most people do get married, and they have relationships. And then they, through that purity of that relationship, learn to transform the lust into love. And so both paths are considered valid, and both paths are considered as powerful as each other. But because we're all different, and because we all kind of just approach life differently, there are alternatives. Like, are you the person who, when there's a cold swimming pool, goes in and kind of dips in like the right toe, and then dips in the left toe, and then kind of goes in slowly? Or are you the person who just goes, okay, let's jump in? So we both approach the swimming pool in a different way according to our nature, but ultimately we get immersed. So different people will embrace that spiritual path in a different way according to what's natural.
Yeah, I appreciate that point of that what you are representing, or renunciation, it's a universal concept. It's not just that there's some people who are renounced and others who are not. And even if we think of something like marriage, in essence, it is also a vow of renunciation. You know, if you get married, it means you renounce every single other person on the planet, and now one's commitment is to one person. So it's interesting how commitment and renunciation are actually totally connected, and no one can commit to anything without some form of renunciation. I think that's important because, for myself, growing up in a Protestant society, for example, never got exposed to monks at all. Never seen a monk in my life until whatever I was in my 19 and had the first experience. So it's also an interesting experience of engaging with that and sort of trying to understand what it represents and then how it's also relevant for myself. So I appreciate that point of showing that renunciation is something universal and it's part of being human. It's actually part of the human experience. And but I think if one enters into a spiritual tradition that has such high ideals, that it is then that we also encounter another kind of tension between transcendence and humanity, which is the experience of having that pressure. Speaking about turning lust into love, I mean, that is a high, lofty goal. When one starts to really speak about love, especially in a transcendent sense. And I've seen through my own experiences in life in the spiritual tradition, through my own practices or vicariously through other people, the intense pressure and tension that can be created in the individual when he is exposed to high ideals. And we see that now in society, for example, there's a big camp of people that would say, in the name, for example, of humanity, that ideals or pressure is the thing that causes unhappiness. And yet in our tradition, that's really something we hold high. And the reality is that the majority of people actually fall short of the ideal. And we've seen in our own life, we've seen to other people, that when we fall short of our ideals, that is a painful experience, an experience that can actually sometimes cause a lot of difficulty, feeling judged either by yourself or by society. How do you deal with that, and what is your experiences with digesting high ideals in your own personal life, and then also in people that you are guiding through their own spiritual journey?
Yeah, it's a problem for many people. There's an ideal of where we want to be. There's a standard of purity. There's a goal, and there's the reality of where we are, and the reality of our own weakness when we wake up every day and we face our own weakness. And then this gap can cause a lot of frustration, can cause a lot of guilt, and can cause a lot of sometimes hopelessness, and even in acute such a lot of depression. Sometimes it just overcomes people. What my experience was this: when a child is growing up, generally the best situation is that a mother and a father is present. And of course, there may be some variation, but generally the father is giving discipline. The father is setting high visions of what the child can and should be. The father is all about achievement and bringing out the best of the child. And then the mother gives a lot of love, gives a lot of nurturing, gives a lot of just encouragement in the here and now. And in that way, what happens is you're striving for something high, but you simultaneously have the love and the acceptance and the encouragement that keeps you going now and helps you to move towards that ideal. Oftentimes what I find in spiritual communities is that there's a lot of the ideals, but maybe there's not enough of the love, the community, the camaraderie, the acceptance, the reality amongst each other to talk about the struggles and help each other. And what I would say is, where you have that community and you have the high ideals, then that combination allows people to achieve their potential. Sometimes what people do is they say, no, these ideals create too much guilt, so we should just take the ideals out. But rather what I say is, keep the ideals, but give a lot of love, give a lot of support. Let's help each other to realize that yes, we do have struggles, but we can make it. And when you have that kind of community which supports the ideals, then the guilt and the sense of lacking doesn't overcome you and drown you. but you learn to grow from that and be what you can and should be. So I think if you take the ideals out, then you shortchange people of the potentiality of what they can and should be. And at the same time, if you take the love and the community out, then you give people a vision, but you don't help them to walk there. So I would say we need both things. And that's why we need a spiritual movement in which there's community and a lot of realness between us, to be able to say, yeah, that's what it says in the books, but this is where I am. But how can we walk there?
What about those who don't have that? I mean, we speak about spiritual community, and I think we can all acknowledge the need for that, but it is difficult to find, actually. I mean, the majority of people in the world today are lonely. I think recently, it was the mayor, Eric Adams. I think I get some newsletter from the mayor's office, and he said something that, there's an epidemic of loneliness in New York City. And they were quoting some statistics, and the reality is, so again, like that ideal example is there when one does have that support, and we can see that it really makes a difference. But what if that is lacking? What if we, like just as a practical example for people, we're trying spiritual life, we don't feel we have support or love. How do we get that? How do we create those kind of relationships, and how do we deal with it when it's lacking and in its absence? Because the reality is, for many of us, either whether it's through a time, like we saw now during the pandemic, many people found themselves in a situation, even previously they might have had some community and support, but then suddenly they were just thrown back onto themselves. And or sometimes people, for work or certain periods of life, they will again be alone and isolated. What is your advice for people in that condition? Like, how does one deal with that? And one would say, try to make the best of a situation that's not ideal.
One relationship at a time. Relationships don't magically form, or relationships are not just something that some people are lucky enough to have and other people are just unlucky. Relationships require investment, relationships require time, relationships require one to be vulnerable and open, and as we try one relationship at a time to actually genuinely connect with people and not just kind of superficially be acquaintances, I think that then we'll find that that love, that support, that encouragement. It's funny, I always say, I sit here talking about relationships, and like when I became a monk, relationships was the last thing I was looking for. I was like, I'm going to become a monk, and then it's going to be me and God, and farewell to everyone else. And then I came into the movement, and every other class and lecture was about relationships. I was like, relationships? But if you would ask me now, I would say hands down, I feel like my greatest wealth in my spiritual life is the friendships I have with other spiritual people. Because I know that everything comes from that. And it took me a long time to open up and invest in that. But one relationship at a time. And you'll find that your ability to actually connect with people expands as you form those friendships. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, that was. I have a similar experience myself, to tell the truth. Like, also having to have practice, getting used to actually practicing spiritual life in isolation, and then making that transition to come into a tradition in which you are confronted with the fact that relationships are essential, and can take a long time actually to learn to again connect with people. But I appreciate your point that really it is one. We don't need to necessarily have a whole community. And that's the ideal. Live live in a community with like the only people that you know and love. But even just one person, it's a nice point. I think even one person. I'm experienced now with my mother, who's all the way in South Africa, And my father passed away not too long ago, and my sister already moved, so she's just alone there. And also realizing the power of just even myself reaching out to her, just even if it just has a relationship with me. You see that difference that even an individual relationship can make. So I really appreciate that point, and I think that is very practical, because we might not have a big community, but we can all at least have one, find one person to invest in. Now, you also spoke about, when you were speaking about the experience of high ideals and falling short of the mark, and then explaining some of those things like guilt, depression, anxiety, the things that can come, the dark sides, the other experience, the other part of the human experience. And I think that's also something to consider when we speak about humanity and transcendence, spirituality. And oftentimes people who have critiques of religion, spiritual traditions, will oftentimes point out that how many inhumane things, on like a global level, for example, has been done in the name of religion. Religious war, religious intolerance, religious hatred. Even if you would just go back 100 years, I mean, one can take a cross-section throughout the globe. You can go look at most societies and you will see that in the name of transcendence or religion, so many things were done, which is, very regretful. So why is that, do you think? Why do you think that even practically, if we look at any tradition, there will be mention of, high goals of love or service to God, or surrender. But why is it that we see in religious traditions through history that, where does that come from? Why is it that these things happen in the name of spiritual life? That these bad things can come in, and repeatedly throughout history. And why is that connection there, and how do we understand that? Because on that basis, many people are arguing that the world would be better, actually, if humans would abandon transcendence, because in the name of that, so much evil has been done.
Yeah, our teacher Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he says that religion can be practiced on 4 levels. He says the lowest level of practice is bhaya, when you practice some kind of religion out of fear. And then he says a little higher than that is asha, which means religion which is practiced out of a desire for something material. And then he says higher than that is kartavya, which means religion which is practiced out of a sense of duty or responsibility or gratitude. And he says higher than that is prema, or religion which is actually practiced because one is seeking and to express and experience love. And so we find most of religion in the world today is functioning on the lower drivers of that ladder. And therefore we find that often religious people do not so spiritual things. And therefore nowadays people like to also make a distinction between religion and spirituality. They say SBNR, spiritual but not religious. Because in the name of religion it can actually be just as materialistic as something non-theological. So I think it's important to understand that when we talk about religious people or religious traditions, we should understand we're really talking about a wide horizon of people who are doing things with varied motivations. And so I'm not going to sit here and try and defend religion, because I think under religion, you're right, a lot of the worst things in the world have happened. But then we could also say, if someone tries to make that point that we'd be better off without religion, then history should also show in the secular parts of the world where there was no religion, where there was no spiritual teachings, that we experienced the greatest amount of peace, community, love, and harmony between people, which isn't the case. So I guess the simple answer to that would be, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Instead of trying to do away with religion, try to find what is the essence of religion. and try to then interact with the tradition to experience that essence. And I think that's a more progressive way to go.
Mm. Yeah, that's a good point. That I think it's important for anyone who is looking for community, and naturally in spiritual life it would bring us into a spiritual community, but that spiritual community is broad, and I think it's something that anyone will encounter, like experiences, not necessarily on like a heavy cosmic or like a level of war crimes against humanity, but one will experience certain unpleasant experiences even within the religious community, or a spiritual community, any community really. And what would your advice be then to people that we come to a spiritual path for ourselves, considering with good motivations, and then as we integrate sometimes into a community, whichever community that might be, then we start to experience sometimes the other side of these things. How do we digest that? How do we digest the imperfections in spiritual communities without it affecting our own enthusiasm for spiritual life or for being part of a community in general? Because many times people that I find, met many people who have become, I would say, jaded with communities in general, to the point where they don't actually want to participate, and because they just don't have any faith anymore that there is such a community that will, at the end, where the benefit will outweigh the cost.
Yeah. So sometimes we're in a community and we see other practitioners who are falling short of those ideals, and it's not very inspiring, because you kind of think like, does this really work? Are these people even changing? A few things we can consider if we become discouraged by maybe other practitioners' lack of spirituality. The first thing is we can consider, instead of seeing how far they are from the ideal, perhaps we can take some time to also appreciate how far they've come from where they were. Mm. Sometimes it's easy to look at the high ideals, as you mentioned, of a tradition and measure everyone as to how much they're falling short. But what you'll also see, if you look closely in most practitioners, is that they've progressed quite a distance from where they were. And therefore that can give us the faith that even though they're not perfect, clearly there is some transformation which has occurred within them from this process. Mm. And that can also be appreciated. Another thing that's helped me is that within a community, I think you can find all types of examples. And our tendency is always to be discouraged by the bad examples, whereas we can start getting encouraged and enthused by the good examples, because there are plenty of those as well. Mm. And therefore, instead of dwelling on the negative or dwelling on what we see to be wrong, rather we can grasp and appreciate and focus and learn from what is right. Mm. And therefore I can say for myself, for sure, I used to think saintly people were people of the past, people you read about in books. And then I began walking around and keeping my eyes open, and I'm convinced there are saintly people who walk amongst us today, people who are living and breathing this wisdom. And sometimes they may not have a position, they may not have a title, they may not be known to the world, but they go about their daily spirituality with incredible purity and incredible sincerity. And if we look hard enough and we look close enough with an open heart, we'll also encounter those people, and that will also reinforce our conviction that, yeah, this works. Mm. So I think there are also plenty of good examples we can look at. And then the final thing is, I'll say that often the faults that we see in others and the imperfections that we see around ourselves, if we're introspective and reflective enough, will also be revealing as to what's going on within our own heart. Mm. The fact that we see things, the fact that we're affected by things, the fact that we allow those things to derail us from our journey, if we're humble enough, will also help us to realize that maybe a lot of that is also going on within me. The fact that it affects me so much means that there's something lacking within myself as well. And therefore, one of our teachers, he says, when faults in others misguide you, then be patient, introspect, and look for faults within yourself. Know that nobody can hurt you unless you hurt yourself. And so that ability to then use that to come back and say, what can I learn about myself from all of this going on around me?
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the principle of how I think, which is in essence in spiritual life in general, that focus that has to shift from trying to change the world and then shifting that focus on trying to change the self, and seeing that to a large part that is what the spiritual path connects to. And I want to then sort of, I think, end off, or sort of go to end, we can take some questions, but maybe as a final reflection, which I think in one sense, as you said, we started with the contrast between transcendence and humanity, basic human desires. And we see that in life in general, whenever you discuss many of these topics, if you ever go to philosophy, if you ever study philosophy, then you go to the philosophy class and you think that you'll get answers. But oftentimes you see what you get is you realize that, at least when it comes to on the platform of the world and the practical reality, is that usually it's a balance. Usually we see that there's always different things that have to be balanced out. And there's usually, what I've tried for myself is to look for that balancing factor, sort of allows us to see how these two things can be reconciled. And I was thinking when you were just speaking, making that emphasis on purification, this idea of purification, that it is possible for us to change, is an interesting point of how these two things come together, like humanity, like who we are, just our nature, and then this idea of these high ideals, and sort of like in between there's this principle of that, yes, there are these ideals, but as you said, at a certain point, people actually, like those ideals become what they live. That becomes their human experience, that's how they live. And it was like, if you might say to us, speak a little bit about this principle of purification in spiritual life, like this idea that one can purify our nature, and what that growth really looks like for a practitioner. What can one expect if we make that commitment to these ideals and we have this idea, it's actually possible to inhabit them. Speaking about that process, and then also, what does that look like? That process of purification, what is the experience for the human being who then commits to this practice and starts to undergo? How do we know that it's working? And what can we expect on the journey towards saintliness, which is ultimately really what spiritual life is about?
Yeah. According to psychology, there's 4 stages that we go through in transformation. The first stage is unconscious incompetence. We're doing something wrong and we don't even know. And then they say an advancement to that is conscious incompetence. You're kind of doing something wrong, but at least you can appreciate it now. And then it said that beyond that, there's conscious competence. You now forcibly, almost deliberately try to act in the right way. And then beyond that, there's unconscious competence, when it just becomes so innate, so resonant with who you are that you don't even have to think about it. And so if we look at the process of spirituality, it kind of goes through those stages. Before we came in contact with any kind of wisdom tradition, we were just living life, eat, drink, be merry, enjoy, have a good time, and what's the problem? There's nothing. Life is good, and I'm doing good. And then we come to the point of conscious incompetence. We actually access a wisdom tradition, and we begin to see all of these impurities within us that previously we were completely oblivious to. One person came to me once, he said, I got to stop coming to the temple because like I'm just becoming a worse person. And I was like, well, maybe some of that was already there, but you're coming to terms with it now, you know. Like when I came to the Hare Krishna temple, along with relationships, every other thing they talked about, every other class was about sex desire. And I was like, what's up with these guys, you know? Like, sex, like, it's okay, yeah. I mean, it's there. It's not such a big thing, you know? Like, what is, you know? And then as time goes by, we actually begin to realize how deeply rooted that is within our psychology and how desensitized we've become to all of these superfluous things, material things, that we don't even recognize it. So conscious incompetence. And then this whole process of Krishna consciousness, or what we call in Sanskrit sadhana bhakti, which means a deliberate spiritual practice, is then that next stage of conscious competence. We try to live by these ideals. We try to rise and practice spiritual processes, and sometimes it resonates, and a lot of the times it doesn't resonate. But conscious competence, we're making a deliberate, determined effort. And then gradually it's very beautiful, as you said, as time goes by, you begin to just live this as your life. It just becomes so seamlessly integrated with who you are to live in this spiritual way. And it's so effortlessly natural that you don't even need to think about these things almost. And this incredible evolution happens. But as you can imagine, through those steps, there's a lot to contend with. There's guilt, there's feelings of hopelessness, there's a sense of, will I ever make it? There's good days and bad days. There's times when you think you've changed, and then the next day you're confronted again with what you thought you had given up. And there's this, so it's a long journey. And it's interesting, Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita says, out of many thousands of people, one may embark on that journey. And out of those that embark on that journey, maybe a few will achieve some level of perfection. And out of those that have achieved perfection, maybe one will reach the final goal. So it's a very rare journey to go on, this journey of embracing purity in a world of degradation. But it's the greatest journey. It's the journey within.
Thank you very much. So I think we have a few minutes. Thank you, Maharaj, for this discussion. I hope it was okay. A discussion format's a little different, but I mean, I think it was good for me. I'm happy. I'm in the best seat in the house. But I think we can open up a little bit and ask if there's any questions from the audience. Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. I'm so curious, you know, you could have just gone on as a monk without kind of burning your boats, if you will, and making this like lifelong decision. You could have just kind of kept the option open. So can you just talk about why you made that choice?
Yeah, that's a great question. Many people ask that, like, why close the doors? Why just keep the options open? You know, sometimes if you imagine like this, I shine a light through this cup, but it has many holes on the side. What happens is, as you close the holes, then the light achieves a certain level of focus, achieves a certain level of intensity, and when it becomes like a laser beam focus, it can penetrate through anything. And so there's a sense in life that when we kind of just close certain doors, we rule out certain things in our life, and as Hari Vilas was saying, we make a commitment in one direction, then that kind of commitment becomes like a laser beam which then allows one to penetrate through anything and reach their goal. So that's what I decided to do. And I think to some extent that's what everyone is doing in their life in their own way. Like, for example, Hari Vilas talked about marriage. And in marriage, to some extent, you're doing the same thing. We could say, like, why did you make the vows? Just like, keep your options open. But we closed it because we wanted to make a commitment and make that relationship meaningful. To say, like, now I don't look at anything or anyone else, it's us. And so I think everyone does that. We begin to just say, like, I don't want to keep looking in so many directions. I don't want to keep looking back. In India, we go on like a pilgrimage, and it's called a parikrama, where you circumambulate like a holy place. So one day I was walking and doing one of these circumambulations, and then there was an old short Bengali man. Right? I guess everyone's short compared to me and Hari Vilas. But he was short. He was half my height. He was double my age. And as I was walking along this path, he just like walked right past me. And I was like, how is he walking faster than me? I ain't gonna take that. So he was walking in front of me, so I started walking faster. I've got long legs here, you know. And it was the most mystical experience because I started walking faster and he just started pulling further and further away from me. And I was like, what's going on here? At one point I was literally running and he was just disappearing into the horizon. And I was like, can you just look back? I just want to see who you are. Are you like a demigod or some divine being? And he never looked back and just disappeared. And then later on, at the end of the circumambulation, he was at the side of the street drinking a coconut water. And I came and I was like, oh, it was him. And he looked at me and he just smiled. And I was like, he knows, he's read my mind, you know. But the realization I had from that was that he never looked back. You see, what happens in our life is we take something up, but then we're constantly looking back. Am I missing out? Or we're constantly looking back, what's everyone else doing? Or we're constantly looking back, like, did I make the right decision? And while looking back, we don't achieve that focus to just go forward and say, let me just walk my path. And so I guess making any kind of vow is just about saying, now I'm not going to look back anymore. Now that's my future. And let me just live my dream. And so I guess that's kind of what it is. Yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else in the audience with a question from Raj or a comment? Yes.
Thank you, Maharaj. There was a wonderful discussion between you both. I just wanted to draw some, shed some light on the things you were talking about in terms of humanity and spirituality. Just because it was really interesting to hear you were saying about some of the most important things for a community, like realizations, is these relationships. And I thought that was really nice because I've never heard it you put forward so prominently. That if we're really trying to achieve like spirituality within our community, then this sort of focus on relationships, and like you say, one relationship at a time, and making sure that just the immediate relationship in front of us is being catered to or sort of respected as much as however many more that we tend to take on is so important, because for us to have a spiritual community, we need to really understand what we need from each other and what we can provide for one another. And then you were saying that through these relationships you find these saintly people, and you will never know who is one of these saintly characters walking around and amongst our community until we engage with those relationships and take those engagements seriously. So I just think it's a really nice point that, you know, to benefit our spiritual community, that and just to really see and appreciate these saintly characters, that, you know, relationships are so important. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And just to say something else on that, I think what's really important, which our spiritual teacher used to say many times, is he said this this movement could do with a lot more kindness. And sometimes what happens in our communities is we have such high spiritual ideals, spiritual aspirations, but sometimes in the midst of all of that we can forget to just be nice to each other. And we become almost so transcendental that we miss just being human and kind. And for me, Srila Prabhupada, the founder of the movement, was the incredible example of incorporating both aspects. Someone who was so rooted in their spiritual realization, but then who could come down and practically relate to anyone on their level. And I think that ability to do both is so much needed. So just to add.
Yes, ma'am.
Hare Krishna. I'm just curious to know, so when you were younger, and you said that you found that growing up, the religion that you were practicing was superficial, and then you found some peace within, you know, when you started reading the Bhagavad Gita and Krishna. I'm just curious to know, what was that thing? Is there that one thing that said, oh, okay, this is it for me? What is it from the Bhagavad Gita that, you know, that made you fall in love with the Bhagavad Gita?
Okay, beautiful. When I first read the Bhagavad Gita, I didn't understand anything. But it was a very profound experience, because it was the first time I read a book, understood nothing, but still felt inspired. Because I read it and I was almost like, there's something profound here, but I have no idea what it is, but I'm going to have to get some help. And that was when I started coming in and speaking to the monks and started having discussions. What moved me about the Bhagavad Gita, which still fascinates me to this day, is that every single question that Arjuna asked Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita were basically the same questions I was asking. It was almost like I was reading a book in which my questions were being answered before I even asked them. And to this day, I just find that the Bhagavad Gita is such an amazing book, because you can practically learn anything you want from the Bhagavad Gita. It can practically help you in any situation, and the versatility and the broadness of what it covers is just astounding. Like now I've been studying the Bhagavad Gita, I guess it would be like, over 25 years now. And I'm still finding newer and newer ways to share that experience, that live that. And so I guess just the if I were to say it in one line, what impressed me about the Bhagavad Gita was that it didn't just have an incredibly deep spiritual vision that it was giving me, but it was just helping me in my life, like now, to deal with, whatever I was going through. So, it's an amazing book.
Well, Maharaj, I think that, really thank you for visiting us. And this was your first trip to New York, and we hope not the last. As they say, what sometimes happens is that you come to one place and then now you have to come back. So we look forward to your continued visits here, and maybe you can share some, if people want to stay in touch, or how they if they want to connect with some of your books and stuff. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess we're on social media. So yeah, we do stuff on Instagram, and there's a YouTube channel. So I think if you just search it up on Keshava Swami, perhaps some of it might be useful, perhaps for you. So you're welcome to connect there. We also have some books. I don't know if we have the books here today. Is it?
I'm not sure.
All right.
They might be here.
Yeah, they
We'll
might
see.
be here. So there might be some books out there, and yeah, there's different books. I think here there's two of them. One is like a summary of the Bhagavad Gita. It goes through the Bhagavad Gita from different perspectives, trying to help you apply it to life. And there's another one which is just my experiences traveling, trying to answer people's questions, and relating the philosophy to what we see in the world. So that's a book called Tattva. So it's out there. So you're welcome to also have a look at that as well.
Cool. Thank you. Well, thank you, Raj. Give me a round of applause from Raj. So we will move on now to the next part of our program, which is a final kirtan before we go out and take some dinner. So you maybe
class after this. Anymore! We have dinner right outside. Please help yourself.